Good afternoon. My name is Sky McCracken. I'm the pastor here at First Methodist downtown Jackson. We are so glad that you are here celebrating us today with us today as we continue our celebration of our bicentennial. Looking forward to today's program, and I know that you are too. I would like to pause and give thanks to God for our gathering and for our food, and then we'll continue our program. Let us pray. Almighty God, we are thankful for this day, a hint of spring in the air. So thankful that lives were spared during the recent storm, and we realize that you continue to watch over us and you hold us in the palm of your hand. As we continue to celebrate by eating food and gathering together out of our love and fellowship for you, we ask that you bless it and us, and may all these things nourish our bodies and souls. And we pray these things in the name of the risen Christ. Amen. And at this time, I invite Elaine Christian to come forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's so nice. We have a room full today. So if this is the first time you've been, welcome. And we do this every first Friday, so we hope you will return again. I'm Elaine Christian. I have the honor of chairing the Jackson-Madison County Bicentennial, an event that kicked off in August and continues to August. So we have a lot going on, and it's really an exciting year to celebrate the 200 years of Jackson-Madison County. And we do these programs each month, and we've developed monthly themes. So it allows us to kind of explore our history a little bit more in depth. And we've been really pleased with the way these events have turned out. I like to always recognize our mayors. I know Scott Conger is here, Jimmy Harris, Mayor Harris. I don't know where Mayor Harris is. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you so much for being here. We do have our Bicentennial Board. If I could ask the members of the Bicentennial Board to please stand. Ladies and gentlemen, these leaders in the community have been working strong for a full year. Well, actually, a year and a half. So thank them for all they do. Also, we couldn't do this without our sponsors and our supporters. So in the center, we have our legacy sponsors, West Tennessee Healthcare, JEA, the City of Jackson and Madison County. And there are many of you in this room who have been a part of this sponsorship opportunity. If you have not, we'd love to have you be a part of this. We set out with the intention to make sure that all events are open to and they're free events. So it's a big undertaking, and it's really an important civic pride initiative for the community. At your table, you will see a document that shows some of these events that we're doing each month. It's our calendar of events. I'd like to just touch on a couple really quickly. Tomorrow is another big day for the Bicentennial. It's the early days of Jackson, celebrating our history in downtown. And this ties in with our theme this month of architecture, the buildings and the evolution of the yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So starting tomorrow at 10, there will be a historic walking tour. A member of our history committee, Robert Briley, will start at the courthouse and end at the courthouse, and that's at 10 o'clock. But actually, even before that, the Andrew Jackson Marathon is going on, and it's the 50th anniversary of the marathon. They actually started that in honor of the sesquicentennial 50 years ago. The Carnegie is going to be open all day, free of charge, with their special exhibits. The library is doing a scavenger hunt, so bring your children or share the news. And then Mr. Howard Ramsey is doing a presentation at 2 at the Carnegie on some history of music. So we hope you'll come down. Another really big thing that's happening tomorrow, and Ed Cookingham is here. Ed, if you would stand, the East Jackson Poems District they've invited 9 reenactors that are going to come in period costume. They're going to portray the history of Jackson, and you really don't want to miss that. Ed, thank you and your group so much for doing that. Ed did put some brochures on the table, but catch Ed if you, or the website if you want more information. There should be some more out front. So that starts at 11. Another reminder, April 16th, we'll have Scott Williams at the library at noon talking about Davy Crockett. And April 30th, Michael Cherry, if I could ask you to please stand. Michael has put together a historic East Jackson walk, and there are some brochures that Michael will have. If you could see him, that's on April the 30th. It's about a 1.8-mile walk, and they're going to even give us a taste of what kind of bologna is it?
Bologna burger.
Bologna burger. So You don't want to miss getting a taste of that. And then I want you all to be the first to know. Of course, everybody knows we've been talking about our finale event. We can just today share the news with you. We've booked Snoop Dogg. Mayor, is that okay with you? Sorry, April Fools. I had to ask Scott's permission. So I had to ask Scott's permission before I pull that on him. Actually, we have not, we have not announced our act for our finale, but we do plan to have a press conference April 22nd. So these little reminder cards are on your table. So make sure you book August the 13th at the ballpark because you will not want to miss. And please, guys, don't say Snoop Dogg is really coming because he's really not. At this time, I always try and recognize a volunteer that's making a difference with the Bicentennial, and I'm going to surprise this young man who I know so well, Trey Cleek. If you would please stand, I'd like to recognize you as the Volunteer of the Month for the Bicentennial. He is on our Bicentennial board. He chairs our time capsule committee, and he helps me and Judy. It's a good thing he has a truck, too, because he gets to take all the swag to different places, and he's so reliable. And this was a special birthday week for him, so happy birthday, Trey, and thank you. Our next First Friday Forum will be on May 6th. The theme will be small business, and the speaker will be Sharon Younger, and the sponsor for that will be Allison Insurance. At this time, I'd like to ask our sponsor for today, TLM, Randy McKinnon, if I could get you to come forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we couldn't do these events without our sponsors, so please join me in thanking Randy and TLM.
Thanks, Elaine. I'd like to recognize Elaine. I know she works hard. I don't know what her hourly rate is to do this job, but I know she puts a lot of hours in and does a really good job. And all the events last year and going on through this year have been really, really great. And we're glad to be a part of that this year, today's, especially this lunch. And thank all of you for coming out today, this beautiful day. Elaine asked me to say just a few words. So in the words of my friends Jimmy Eldridge, I'll keep it under 30 minutes. But I would like to say a thing or two. In the theme of the presentation today, those of you that don't know, TLM Associates is a full-service architecture and engineering firm. We're located right in downtown Jackson. Our office is at 117 East Lafayette Street. We are in a building that was originally built in the 1840s. So even though it don't go back 200 years, 180 or so, that building burned and was rebuilt in 1870 in its current condition. We also own the building next door that is 115 East Lafayette that, as far as I know, is still the 1840s building that was built, and we put a new facelift on it, and we were in the process of renovating and expanding our offices over into 115 next door. TLM has been around since 1964. And in 2001, we made the decision to move downtown. And part of that was because of the character of downtown and the architecture and being an architecture firm, it seemed to fit. And we had a little resistance in the office, but nobody's ever regretted it, and it's been one of the best decisions we've ever made. And I would be remorse if I didn't bring this up, but one of the past president of TLM, Dennis Henderson, I know worked with a lot of you folks and has a lot of friends here, and he passed away a few weeks ago and would be having his 69th birthday April the 9th. So I'd just like to take a moment and recognize Dennis for all of his accomplishments and the things that he's done to help make Jackson and Madison County a better place. So with that, Elaine, thank you for letting us sponsor today, and thank you all for being here.
Randy, thank you so much, and thanks for mentioning Dennis. As everyone knows, Dennis was our vice president of the Bicentennial Commission Board and was so instrumental in developing the early plans and was involved with us until he became ill. And we all known Dennis lifetime. So just thank you for mentioning that. At this time, I'd like to thank the church. Sky, thank you so much for hosting us each time. And Andrew for the food. It was wonderful. Linda Rizzuto and her team who do the decorations. It just takes the whole group. Robert Curlin, who does the audiovisual, and Thomas Varghese, always so happy to have you and E+. This is televised today and will be replayed on E+ Channel 6. And then now we can introduce our program. We are so excited to talk Dr. Larry Ray into being a part of this program today. He has taught architecture and art at Lambuth. I mean, it's very hard to introduce Larry. We all know him in so many ways. But he is from Memphis. He graduated with a Bachelor of Degree from Lambuth in 1964, continued his education, including even being in Oxford, Mississippi. The other Oxford, the one that's in England. The University of Oxford in England, and did some graduate work there. And then he, of course, has taught at Lambuth as a professor of art and interior design from 84 to 2010, and later became the dean of the School of Arts. He did do several things in the community. This is one of the publications that Larry did. It's the book on the three stars of Tennessee. And Larry, what an accomplishment to put this together. There are so many things that Larry has done, but we're just really honored to have Larry with us today. Tammy, we appreciate you helping Larry as well. So Larry, if I could introduce Dr. Larry Ray. Thank you.
So I would like to start off by saying that I served on the Sesquicentennial Committee 50 years ago and did this very lecture, and I'm not sure where I did it. I've forgotten, and even my notes, so I had to start over from scratch to do this lecture today, but it was lots of fun. All my good buddies that I've thanked on one of the slides basically helped me go all over the county and look for buildings and architecture. And today I can't cover every building. I've had a lot of people say, I hope my house or my business is in this lecture, but it had to be cut at some point. Okay, let's get started. What I want to do today is to go back to in this church when Anita K. Archer years ago started in the old, over in that corner, I believe, was the old lunchroom, dinner room, whatever it was called, down in the basement. And basically, she started a senior citizen program, and it was called Armchair Travel. So I'm going to take us back to those days, and I want you to settle back in your chair, and we're going to take off, and we're going to go through 200 years of Madison County history, and we'll get started right now. So Tammy is going to do, so first of all, I want to do a quote from John Ruskin. You may not be familiar with him, his pictures in the slides up here, and he was a great Englishman. He was a aesthetic philosopher. He was an author. He was a little bit of everything, one of the first architectural historians, and basically he wrote the famous book, The Stones of Venice, in 1851, and in that he is quoted as saying, architecture is history writ in stone. And we could add to that today that it is also writ in plastic and glass and metal and you name it. Great man, and I've always been a great advocate. Today, in order to cover all this material, because it's a lot to do the architecture of a county and a city, basically I have divided it up into categories. And so listed in front of you are some of the categories that I'm going to cover today, like governmental architecture and transportation architecture and hospitality architecture. And hopefully if I get through, I'll just go as far as my time limit, and I'll just stop when I run out of time. Also vernacular architecture, which would be farm architecture. So it's many different types. But we're going to take off right now and go. So we're going to start off first with government architecture. And basically this would be so important because this is takes center role today, since we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of the county and the city. So we're going to start off with the county courthouse and then move to the city hall. So first of all, of course, if you go downtown and stand on the court square, you will see why it was placed there, the court square, because from that, especially looking toward the New Southern Hotel, the land goes down, and this was a river town. And so basically to get the courthouse way up above the water level and any problem that may have occurred, the very first courthouse, there's been a series, and all on the same spot as it is today, that basically the first courthouse was a log cabin. We know this from writings. It no longer survives, and I've just got a symbol slide to suggest what possibly the first one would have kind of resembled. It was down in one corner, and it was made of log, and basically it had a dirt floor. After a few years, the decision was made to create a substantive architectural type of courthouse, and this is a picture of it. And basically, this was in the federal style, which the oldest architectural style in our country is the Georgian, colonial Georgian, but that all occurred long before this county was established. So then basically the federal was the first style of our whole region. And basically, if you could go back to the last slide, basically you'll see that it is made to look like a Grecian temple. It has not real columns, but pilasters or flat columns on all four sides. And basically, this is because of a doctrine called Associative Symbolism, which was believed in across America back in these days. And basically, it was that certain types of architecture from the past should give some type of clue as to the type of building style you would use. So this obviously had as its origins the Temple of Ancient Greece, because that was the associative symbolism, that was the architecture of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where democracy and republicanism basically got its start. So this stayed in the center of the court square for many years, and then with time they needed space, and so they began to add wings and buildings and things so that it became kind of a conglomerate of different architectural styles, very typical of the Victorian era. And you'll notice that this is a view, and you can still see embedded in this is the original federal courthouse with the columns. But then basically you can see that it is now it's been very much Victorianized, has a clock tower. All of this was facing one direction, and then the old courthouse faced another direction. So basically, you had a hodgepodge of everything here, and it included more rooms that were needed in the courthouse, and then, of course, the bell tower itself. And this is another view of it from a postcard of the period. Finally, the decision was to bring that all down. And so in the 1930s, the decision was to tear down all of those buildings and build a new courthouse. And this is the view of the courthouse today. It was built in the 1930s. And basically, this was a public works administration, a part of the New Deal, a part of their purpose and model, and their buildings that look very similar to this all over the place. The Nashville Courthouse and City Hall look very similar. In fact, if you're in Nashville and you see it, you think, well, wow, this looks like the Madison County Courthouse, but they're very, very similar. All of them, because this was the style of the time of the 1930s, was the Art Deco style. So it's in the Art Deco. Art Deco, it comes from the French word for arts decorative, and 1925 was an exposition in Paris in which the Art Deco style was introduced to the world. Art Deco is the style of modernism. In fact, in France, it is called the futuristic style. It's also called Art Moderne. And so the citizens of Jackson-Madison County wanted a courthouse that was up to date and modern, and that's what they got. The building is a classical example of Art Deco decoration, and you can see that basically, if you look at this, it is a geometricized version of an ancient Greek temple. It has columns on all four sides like a Greek temple, except they have been made square instead of cylindrical like the Parthenon was. Also, the decorations all on the courthouse are palmettes and different types of designs that were used in ancient classical buildings like the Parthenon. I always have loved the two lanterns that flank the front entrance and the rear entrance. And to me, I think of Star Wars. When I see those, they look just like R2 and R2. And I ought to get foot to make the noises that R2 did too, because I actually look at those and I hear those noises like we're done. So anyway, this building was built during the New Deal, and I've written this down so I could remember it. Public Works Administration, and Harold Ickes was the Secretary of the Interior who oversaw all this. And basically, he was, even though he worked in a Democratic administration, FDR, he was a lifelong Republican, and basically, again, oversaw the building of the Madison County Courthouse. What the New Deal was to try to re-stimulate the economy of America that was going under in the Depression. And so basically, what groups like the Public Works Administration would provide the money, but then they would get local workers, construction workers, plumbers, electricians, and basically would also hire local architects, local contractors to build the building, and therefore the money would go into the local economy. So that was a very important thing. So basically, the courthouse still stands to this day and is a wonderful example of modernism and modern design. Next. So then Jackson did not have a city hall for much of its history. Basically, the city offices were scattered around in rental offices and et cetera. And then finally, in 1924, under the administration of Mayor, I'm losing his name, Mayor Lawrence Taylor. And basically, in descriptions, it's usually said that it has Art Deco details as well. But as an architectural historian, I've looked and I can't see any Art Deco about this. But basically, it was a wonderful building. It had the police department in the basement, and then it had the upper floors were the offices and the mayor's office, et cetera. And when the decision was made to leave this building, then it was turned over to the Arts Council, which still has its offices there today, and a wing was added for the NED, which has, of course, been such an important cultural headquarters for our community. So the decision was made to build a new city hall across the street from the present courthouse. And can I borrow this for a minute? Which one does the?
Right here.
Okay. So I'm going to use I don't know if you can turn around and just see, but basically what had to happen was that they had to bring down the block in front of the courthouse. And originally, anybody that's not been around Jackson for long, you won't remember this, but there used to be what was called Jackson's only skyscraper that stood right here, and it was first national. I think it was 7, depends on how you counted it, 7 to 9 stories. And then it had the vaults in the basement. And to bring this building down, it was imploded. And I've looked up the Jackson Sun article on that implosion, and basically it said that hundreds of Jacksonians gathered with their cameras to photograph, because you can imagine what a spectacular thing that was. I bet there are a bunch of people in here who were there that day. In the middle was the location of, I think it was Ball Shoe Store, and then to this side was the Woolworth Building, 5 and 10 cents. And this also was very historic, in that this is where for the Civil Rights Movement, where Lane students picketed, and there's a plaque on the corner that basically tells that this was very historic in the story of civil rights in America. So basically, this is a wonderful building, and it has really added a lot to Jackson and to the city. And TLM, our sponsors today, were in charge of building this building and served as architects and engineers for its construction. So again, I'm going from category to category. We have commercial architecture, and basically Jackson's blessed to have lots of commercial buildings downtown, as again the TLM folks were telling us about their building and its age, and that it goes back into the 19th century, and all around downtown, the Rainey Kaiser building. Mr. Rainey is with us today, and basically it is, I think they've now determined that it's the oldest commercial building still standing in the downtown area. These buildings were used for everything. If you stop and read the signs in the front, you'll see that they were grocery stores and clothing stores and shoe stores and you name it, just a little bit of everything through the long period that they've been standing. Again, here's a whole row right behind the new City Hall of buildings that basically were go back before the Civil War, and were a little bit of every kind of building you can imagine. Very typical in America, in most American cities, the commercial buildings from the 19th century are in what is called the Florentine Palace style, and these are two buildings that were photographed from my guides of the architecture of Florence, where I live every other 3 months, go back and forth from Jackson to Florence. And so this is something that I'm very interested in. And basically these, I mentioned associative symbolism earlier, that the first courthouse was used the ancient Grecian temple as its associative symbol, because it symbolized the birth of republicanism and democracy. These Florentine palaces came to symbolize in the 19th century mercantilism, and they were considered the ideal form for commercial buildings. And so basically you can see, this is a flattened out drawing, but basically they had rows of windows on each floor, and then basically the whole top of the building was crested with a huge overlaying cornice. And so basically you can travel all across America, and in the old surviving 19th century commercial districts, you'll see buildings galore that are children of the Florentine Palace style. This is the Robertson company that's still standing, and basically you can see that it's very much in this style with the round top windows. A lot of times the cresting of the round top is metal, and sometimes they're called in architectural books eyebrows, because they resemble eyebrows. And then you can see that it has a huge projecting cornice, which is, again, very typical of the Florentine Palace style. Now we changed to religious architecture, and obviously in most communities, a lot of the money and whatever went into building the finest buildings imaginable to honor God and to be the pride of the communities where they were built. So let's look quickly at some of these wonderful religious buildings that were built in Jackson. The First Baptist Church was located not so far from here, and I cannot remember his name, John Allen, basically bought this building when the Baptist Church moved out on the 45 bypass, and basically the building was being renovated by John Allen, and he stripped it of all its furnishings, and he was going to make it into a rental venue for weddings and for all kinds of banquets and you name it. And sadly, it caught on fire and burned in one of the most spectacular fires in Jackson history. People could see the smoke and some of the places, the flames from all over Jackson. So we lost this building. I've looked and looked because the last time I did this lecture 50 years ago, I found a wonderful picture taken by John Allen's crew from somebody up on top of this dome. And it's a little glass-windowed area. And they were able to take the window out and photograph looking straight down onto the floor of the building. And it was absolutely spectacular looking, but I couldn't find it. It's somehow the book in the library is gone, and the John Allen firm themselves don't have it a record anymore. Then when I first came to Jackson 60 so years ago, basically a lot of the churches were all clustered together up around the Graham bus station. And so here we have the First Presbyterian Church that later was made into the, it's not Union Planters Bank, Bank Courthouse. And then also the First Christian Church, which was an absolutely spectacular building, which is the parking lot today of the Bank Courthouse. And it was kind of a Richardsonian Romanesque style building. It was one of my favorite churches, but it long ago torn down, and the parking lot was put there instead. And basically they moved out to the, can't think of the family name, out near Aldersgate Methodist, right across the street. So again, looking at other examples, I tried very hard to not just concentrate this lecture on Jackson things, but also include as much out in Madison County as possible, because this is also the bicentennial of the county. So here we have in Mercer, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. I love this building, and it's made from wood, and it is today the City Museum of Mercer. And then next to it, from Denmark, is the oldest Presbyterian church in West Tennessee. And basically, it's an interesting building. If you look at it, it's really different. And it's because the second floor was a Masonic lodge, and the first floor was the church. So it's they're really fascinating and interesting buildings. Then we have the Methodist Church, and then also the Mother Liberty Church, which this is what it originally looked like before the 2003 tornado did such terrible damage to it, and today a more modern version. The oldest church here in Jackson is the St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and it too suffered greatly in the 2003 tornado. And here is an old picture from 1832, and then you have what it looks like since it was rebuilt. Basically, it had to be taken to the ground and then rebuilt, and they did some changes which were necessary for modernization. So you can see the front is pulled forward and flattened out. But anyway, it's a wonderful building, and I would say kind of a Romanesque revival. And the fact that all our religious buildings are not just Christian, but we also have had historically for a long time a Jewish synagogue, and this is views, and it's still going strong as far as I understand. I wanted to share with you one last religious building, And the reason this is here, because it's not a church, not a synagogue, but it is basically it was a commercial building, but it was owned by the church. And this was CME, the Colored Methodist Episcopal Publishing House. This was along my favorite Jackson building, and it's just heartbreaking that it was destroyed, and for no reason. It's just part of urban renewal that it was brought down. And today it's just an empty lot. It's located on Shannon Street, and it's behind the series of little buildings that Mayor Gist built that basically are wooden and temporary. And like today, one is a bookshop and one is a coffee shop. And behind those two, it's just an empty lot. It's so sad, because it could be this fabulous building if somebody had stepped forward and saved it. Can you go back? And basically, it is the epitome of the Art Deco style. You can see the roof line. Art Deco was highly influenced by the discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922. And so basically, a lot of the geometric forms used in Egyptian architecture were used for Art Deco decoration. This is the main building, and after the Methodist Publishing House moved to Nashville, then basically it was for years just sat there, and it was a barber shop. I can remember when it was a barber shop, had a barber pole out front. It had basically was a woman's beauty parlor, and on and on. It breaks my heart, because I wish somebody could have saved the decorative reliefs. It's rare in that it's not so typical of American architecture to have sculptural carvings and decorations all over the cover. It was made from limestone, but if you can see that over the front door is, again, very typical Art Deco stair-stepped architecture. And there's a wonderful carving of Moses, again, the Black church associated with ancient Egypt in the Bible, and because that was Africa, and so it was a good association between black folks and the Christian religion. But you can see there's just marvelous carvings, and it's a shame they weren't taken down and used, like in Victory Park or someplace erected for decoration. We now turn to funerary architecture, and basically this is something we think of more when we think of Egypt, but it is a form of architecture. In my research, there's only 3 mausoleums that are standing in Jackson, and one is in Hollywood Cemetery, and 2 are in Riverside Cemetery. One in Riverside Cemetery was badly damaged in the 2003 tornado, and it was literally exploded, and coffins were blown all over the place. And so it's been resurrected, but very ugly architecture. It's not something to be proud of. This particular mausoleum, though, is still standing, and you can tell that it was locally made. It has kind of a crudity of execution, but the masterpiece of funerary architecture in Jackson is the Warmouth Ezel Mausoleum. And I'll just stop right now and let Lonnie take over, because she's the expert on this subject. She has helped me with a lot of genealogy related to this tomb. This is a fascinating thing. You would never expect a mausoleum of this quality. The description says that it's made of cream limestone, and basically it is a marvelous building, and has a fascinating history. And I'm going to try real quickly to tell the story, because this was part of, in its day, the equivalent of the O.J. Simpson notorious trial that was in every minute you turned on television. O.J. Simpson, this, that, and the other. And so basically, this is the story of the Sonny von Bülow, who lived in Newport, Rhode Island, and her husband, Klaus von Bülow. And basically, the Klaus von Bülow, Sonny was from an immensely wealthy family. She inherited over $100 million, and her mother has equally as much money. And Sonny von Bülow had relatives in our area. Her mother's family were from Humboldt, and then there were Jackson relatives as well, because a mausoleum like this cost a huge amount of money, and we know that it was brought in on the train and erected in Hollywood Cemetery. And you're riding down the road and you're passing quiet, peaceful little Hollywood Cemetery, and you never dream that such a notorious history it's related to a notorious history. So anyway, quickly to tell the story about Sonny von Bülow, that she was basically had an earlier husband, and she had several children by that marriage. And then later she married Klaus von Bülow, who was in himself a multimillionaire. He was a Dutch aristocrat, and he was the assistant to J. Paul Getty, the great oil millionaire. And so basically the children of Sonny von Bülow went into a coma state and was basically was in a vegetable state the entire rest of her life. She lived 30 years. She was called the Sleeping Beauty because her family had people come in and do her nails and her hair and whatever, but she just laid there. And of course, Americans just ate all this up because this was the richest people in the country, and people who were aristocrats and people who were intermarried with royalty. And so they just couldn't get enough. I happened to be in school when this was all going on in Newport, Rhode Island, and I was studying under Richard Guy Wilson, the most famous American architectural art historian. And so basically we would come to, in Newport, we would get together for breakfast, lunch, and dinner at Salve Regina College. And all we talked about was the von Bülow tape. It was just the kind of, over eggs for breakfast. We were talking about this trial. And so basically what the family took, the children took Klaus von Bülow, her Sonny's husband, to trial, and he was convicted of tampering with her medication, and so basically was sentenced to prison. And basically, again, it was just the talk of the country. The Klaus von Bülow had a daughter, and she supported him, so they took it back to court, and basically this time he hired Alan Dershowitz, the famous Harvard lawyer who basically was President Trump's defense lawyer in his second impeachment trial. And so basically, as I mentioned, this was so famous in all the news because everybody from the President of the United States on down somehow was a part of all of this. So basically, the second trial, he was acquitted, and they were able to prove that he had not played around with her insulin medication, which then basically allowed him to go free. As I mentioned, she then lived on for another 30 years. So it's a fascinating, I know this seems like this isn't much to do with the architecture, but it's just a fascinating thing. I began this lecture with saying that architecture is history written in stone. And so basically right here in our own community, this little mausoleum is loaded with a lot of history other than just what is represented there. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, carry on.
So quickly to do transportation-related architecture, and I could have done a lot because this could have had a photo of the airport building as well. But of course, the most famous is the Greyhound bus station that John Allen has so well to save this for our community. And now it's a restaurant, but it's really a wonderful, and it's Art Deco itself. So Jackson has a lot more Art Deco architecture than we realize. Can you do that? And then there are several train. This was a huge train community, and railroad was a large part of the economy of Jackson. I can remember when I first moved here, we could go down to this depot and hop a train right here in Jackson and go spend the weekend in Chicago and go and come back, and it was a wonderful thing. So basically, today, of course, the depot building still stands to representing this as a transportation hub. All the medical and health buildings, some of you may be old enough to remember, I remember this, the YMCA building that was located downtown on the site of the Ridley Alexander Park. Beautiful building, as you can see, and it had huge swimming pool, and days of the week changed. It was YMCA part of the week and YWCA, but just an amazing building, and it's sad that it had to come down and was destroyed. It was right across the street from the Baptist church. And here's the Jackson's first hospital, which was the Fitzwhite Clinic. And basically, this is another interesting story that Dr. Fitz, when Queen Elizabeth came to speak before the House of Burgesses on the, I think it was the 400th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown, that basically he was appointed to be Queen Elizabeth's doctor and physician while she was visiting in this country. So that was a Jackson boy who had really made it for himself, high reputation. And this is the Webb Williamson, which used to stand right beside this church. And basically, it was for a long time the main hospital. And I remember through the years meeting people who were born in the Webb Williamson. I imagine there's some folks here in this audience that were born. And of course, it has grown into this magnificent general hospital complex that you see here in an early stage, and then what it looks like today. Wonderful architectural example for our community. And then, of course, the lift is the modern day version of the YMCA, and basically with swimming pools and all the indoor track and all the things that are necessary for health. Hospitality architecture, hospitality in the world of design means hotels and restaurants. And basically this was on the main square, was the Southern Hotel, which was very famous in its day for its great Southern food, etc. And then eventually the No family bought it and built the Albert No Hotel there. And basically the little bit of the story that you can see here is a long, thin building kind of in the middle of this picture, and that is the remains of the Southern Hotel when they tore down the front and built the Albert No Hotel. When I came to teach at Lambuth, Lambuth was building a men's dormitory. And that year, here I'd just gotten out of graduate school. I was looking so forward to having my own apartment and being able to settle in after having lived in dorms, et cetera, from my college days. And so basically, I was called in by Dr. Wilder, and he said, our boys' dormitory is not going to be ready, and we're asking you to be the dorm father down at the New Southern, that basically the boys are going to have to live in the New Southern Hotel, and we're going to provide bus transportation. So this was one of my achievements in my lifetime, to be the dorm father at the New Southern. I will never forget, one day I was in my room, and somebody just beat my door down, and I opened it, and there was old Dowager Mrs. No standing there. She was the grandfather of Albert No and Nora, grandmother, and she said, she reached in and grabbed my ear and started leading me out the door, and she said, "Sonny, come with me." So she took me up the elevator and to the top floor of the penthouse and to look out, and when we did, we looked out over the Elks Club building, and it was just a sea of beer bottles, and all of my dorm inhabitants had gone up and partied and thrown beer bottles out. And she said, can you get Lambuth maintenance people here right away? They're not very happy, and they've been causing me a lot of trouble. So basically, I got them there, and they cleaned it up. Also, in my early days, in this wing that I described, which is the remains of the thing, was Jackson's earliest commercial art gallery, owned and run by Patsy Kisber, who was Jonas's sister. And basically, that's where I had my first one-man art exhibit in Jackson. So, and that was, I was glad that happened because I at least got to see that old building and what it originally was like. This is the Albert Hotel that was built in front of the, basically of the old Southern Hotel. It's in an Adams style, and basically it's really a beautiful building, and it had big classical Adam urns on the roof, all of which had to be taken down after the 2003 or 4, I can't remember, tornado, because they were unstable because of the winds, the conditions, etc. Educational, we'll do this rather quickly. I could have shown all kind of pictures of high schools and that no longer stand, but basically decided to focus on the colleges. And this is Lane College, which is a important college here in Jackson. And you can see some of the buildings that in part are originals from the past. Also, the Memphis Conference Female Institute, which basically stood right down the street and was a college just for women, MCFI. And some of my favorite stories are hearing how on Sunday morning the MCFI girls would put on their academic regalia and they would march up the street and come here to church in the First Methodist Church. So you kind of have a mental image of that, and it's a colorful part of Jackson's history. And then eventually Lambuth changed its charter from being a women's college to a co-ed, and it decided to abandon that site and basically move out to what was then called Long Street. And they built the building that you see here, and it is basically was an all-in-one building because you came up the steps in front, which were later torn away, and basically there was a huge entrance, beautiful formal entrance lobby, and then everything else, you went up steps to one way. It was the men's dorm. You went up steps one way, and it was the women's dorm. And then in the basement area down here, low in this picture, was the cafeteria. And then there was, on the main floor to one side was the chapel, and then elsewhere was the library. So all the different parts of the college were located there. It is a copy, the architect that built this copied the Hampton Court Palace right outside of London as his model for that building and for architecture. The original goal was to come out straight so that the buildings came from left and right on either side of those stairways, and the campus would have gone out toward Lambuth Boulevard. But later, the decision was made to build the campus behind the administration building, and it is basically all the work of Dr. Luther L. Gobble, who came to Lambuth from Greensboro College in North Carolina, and it was a real Georgian campus. The buildings really went back to the 18th century, and but later he oversaw the expansion of Lambuth and the continuation of the Georgian, but this time not real Georgian, but a Georgian revival. And today, I think it's one of the beautiful spots of Jackson, excuse me.
It's dear to your heart.
It is. So here are views of Union. Union was the oldest college, and it was a reason it's called Union is that there were many, many colleges and schools and academies, not only here in Jackson, but elsewhere, that basically were located around this area. And when they all were brought together, that was a union of these different schools and different colleges where the title comes from. For years, it was located not so far from here in wonderful buildings, some of which go back to before the Civil War. Can you do enough? And this was the administration building. There's still a couple of buildings like the juvenile court building that stand there and basically are part of the wonderful history of the Union, which has been such an important part of the Jackson history. And again, this is a view of the original building of the administration building. And this is one of the pre-Civil War buildings that I can remember standing there for years and years, but finally had to be brought down when the school left that particular area. And today it's an absolutely beautiful campus as the college has grown and expanded with pharmacy programs and law degrees, et cetera. And you see the wonderful newest building, the library, which I call a mosque revival that kind of resembles more of a mosque than any other. But basically you can see it located in this picture. Now we come to residential architecture, and the oldest building in Madison County is this wonderful federal-style house out on the Beach Bluff Road, and basically called Rose Hill, originally built by Matthias DeBerry, but restored beautifully by Dan Tankersley. And it's an amazing survival of a historic residential house. You can see the date, 1825. And the second oldest house in Madison County is the Gibbs Bain House out on Beach Bluff Road. And it is marvelous. It's kind of a vernacular Greek revival style building, really wonderful in itself. And we come into the story of the South and the Old South and the antebellum homes. And the Jackson's most fabulous antebellum home was Edgewood, which was the Campbell Merriweather family lived there, and the house was marvelous. It was stood for a long time, and then it was bought by Clay Brookshaw, and basically he was going to make it into the Old Country store, but he died before that happened, and all the fittings of the interior were taken out and taken to what was then the Old Country store on Airways, and then later out to the present Old Country store. Also, the columns were taken, and this is a house right off of Russell Road, and basically you can see the 6 columns have survived and are still with us to this day. Important part of the story. It's one of my favorite stories is I can remember when I first came here that as you went out Highland and you looked up Grand Street was this glorious antebellum home. And basically this was the Page family home. And basically we have Linda here today who could really get up and tell us more about this. But that house was destroyed in almost the identical tornado that we just had. That basically it started and it hit Jackson State, then jumped and hit this site, and then jumped over to Lambuth and knocked down 18 of trees as it has done. The Page house was taken to the ground, and basically nothing really remains. I've looked and looked and looked and looked for pictures, but luckily Candy Joyner Russell, who's with us today, painted the house, and so we do have the painting today of the house where we don't have any photographs showing what it looked like. It was an absolutely marvelous house and had glorious magnolia trees all around it, all of which was destroyed when the tornado did that job. Interesting story is the county historian, and is it Marguerite Lane, who was the lady who lived in the house, and she kind of didn't get eye to eye with our county historian. And so the county historian just obliterated all memory of her and the house from history. And so basically luckily we have Candy's painting to see what it looked like. More antebellum homes. I call this the, I can't think of the name. Dr. Was the coroner of the county for many, many years. Ballard. Excuse me.
Dr. T.K. Ballard.
Ballard lived in this house and owned it for years, so it's a marvelous pre-Civil War. And another one of my favorite is the Oakley plantation, which is on Highland, and basically the Crook family later bought it and added another story. But if you could, and I wish we could, take off the Crook addition above, and it would just be one story, and it's an elegant antebellum home. We also have a small family-sized antebellum home on Campbell Street, right across from the Lambuth Memorial Methodist Church. And basically, thanks to my friend Susan, we tried to call the heirs of the family, but they had no records, and all they could say is that according to family history, it was more than 100 years old. So we're going to go with that, even though somebody might disprove it later. Also, in addition to wonderful examples of Greek Revival antebellum architecture, we have a host style called Italianate. And there's wonderful Italianate there. A lot of photographic records of Jackson show there were many, many Italianate houses at Lambuth. In our files, we had a picture showing across the street from MCFI was a whole series of Italianate houses like this. So basically, this is the M.D. Anderson house, marvelous Italianate. What is typical of Italianate is the wide overhanging eaves and brackets. Sometimes it's called bracketed style, and there were wooden brackets ornamenting the cornice. So basically, this is, of course, the home of the famous M.D. Anderson, who then later would become the heir to the M.D. Anderson Cancer Research Center in Texas.
Mm-hmm. And he's buried at River.
And then this is the Walsh home, it's called, but also it has several names. And basically, this is the house that Melinda Baker restored. And it was two houses built by Mr. Walsh for his two daughters, one facing Dedrick and one facing Cumberland. And the former Arts Council director, drawing a blank on her name, Kathy Leatherwood. So this is wonderful having it. This is my brain up here, living brain standing. And basically, this became a wedding venue real near to where I live. I live in the lift. Basically, is the Farrar House, which is being restored right now, thank goodness. And it's a wonderful vernacular example of Italianate architecture. And this is part of the famous story of the Union captain in the Civil War who was stationed here and then fell in love with the daughter of the owner of this house and later came back and married her. And then he changed some things about the house, and he added the wonderful bay windows that you see. And then years later, Rose Johnsey owned this house and did a lot of restoration work herself. So it's a famous love story connected with the house. And then we come to Victorian, and Jackson has lots of wonderful Victorian houses. And this is the Wisdom House, and this is one of those houses brought in on a train, and then it was a mail order house, and then erected. So it's a wonderful state of preservation thanks to May Oglesby, who lived there and for years and years worked at maintaining it. And this is the Polk Anderson House on Main Street, now sometimes called Privet House, and it's a wonderful example of Victorian. And then this is the Curry Harris. We have two descendants of the family who lived here with us today. And basically this was built by Dr. Curry, but then who literally down the street had his clinic and then a drugstore as well. And then later, Arthur Harris bought the house, and he and his wife had 11 children. This was the day when people had big families. A lot of these big Victorian houses were for that purpose. And so, for instance, my own, let's say, great-grandmother was one of 14 daughters of one family. So big, big families with lots of children. We come now in the 20th century, and of course, Jackson's greatest example of an early 20th century house is the Pigford home, now the Presbyterian church. It's a marvelous example. I fought this battle for years and years and years and years here with different folks, but it's another mail order house, and there's no doubt in my mind that it's a mail order house, and I will argue with anybody who would like to get in an argument. But basically, it was brought here by train and erected, and it again is one of the great residential homes of Jackson. No longer that. The elites of Jackson and the general public were very traditional in their architectural taste, and so basically they built houses that were revivals of historic styles. This is the Tigert House located on Northwood, which is a Georgian revival house. Other elites that built houses are these two wonderful houses. One is Stonehaven, built out off of Stonehaven Drive, and the other is Linwood, which is built right behind the Linwood Kroger. And basically, these two houses were built by a sister-brother team. There was both brothers were Spraggins, and they married two white sisters, not white as in race, but white as in family name, married two white sisters. And the two couples built these two wonderful houses, but in traditional style. The Stonehaven house, which is now the McWhirter home, is like a stone chateau. And this is very reflective of the fact that the two wives, the Spraggins wives, white sisters, were natives of New Orleans and had been active in the Mardi Gras and had been queens of Mardi Gras. And every so often I come across something somewhere that I'm touring are the crowns and scepters that those two ladies wore as Mardi Gras royalty. And basically, this house also, if I'd had more time, I was going to add some interiors of this house. Has some of the most wonderful Art Deco interiors in the whole city. So again, here, Art Deco examples, wonderful stairway and an upstairs kind of a room with Art Deco features. And then the Linwood is in a more classical style, but if you go around at the back of it, again, that New Orleans heritage comes through because there's wonderful ornamental iron balconies, etc., in the back. Then again, this tradition of the elites building traditional houses, and this is one of the grand homes of Jackson. This is the Pine Grove Estate out near USJ, and basically it is an exact copy, and the Piskey firm, who was originally located downtown and helped to build the Ned, and basically they built this particular house for the owner. I'm trying to remember his name. Baker, James Baker. And basically this house is a marvelous example of a revival style house. It's almost an exact copy of Oak Alley, one of the great Louisiana plantation homes that you follow the River Road. And as you get to New Orleans, it's located. And it basically is now owned by a new owner after sitting there for 10 years, just locked up. And basically it has been restored by the new owner and furnished with very appropriate types of antiques. we come to more traditional architecture, and here we have this is Charleston Square, and here all the houses are revivals of the past. Here we have a salt box style house with the projecting cantilever floors, and we have a Victorian revival. The whole street are all houses that are revival of traditional forms. And then we have whole neighborhoods of bungalow-style housing, and this is the Atlanta Area Neighborhood Association. Is all these streets like Division Street and others around, and they're marvelous houses. This comes from the India, whereas it's not Indians, it's in tribal Indians, but it's the country of India. And this is from Bengali, where these were based roughly on the native houses of the Indian people in those areas. And these bungalow houses are so popular across America today. And then after the bungalow phase, you get the ranch style of subdivision houses. And this was post-World War I. This is when downtowns began to be abandoned. Suburbs came in. Cars came in. And basically, you had people who were building these residential houses, and they're all kinds of ranch houses. Recently, we went to see Anita Kay get her award at the museum in Union City, and from the time we left Jackson all the way, I guess an hour and a half drive, every house we saw was one of these style houses, the ranch style. And of course, there's Tudor Ranch, and you name it. Now, I want to now show you some modern houses built in Jackson. I've been showing you lots of traditional style. And the first modern house is the one and only kind. And this is a Art Deco house that's located on Fairmont Street. And basically, it is a marvelous example of Art Deco with all that precise cubes and real Art Deco windows, and a lot of characteristic building material of Art Deco are glass bricks. And then some other wonderful modern house, and this is a style I call rustic contemporary. And basically, this style was built as a modern example. And basically, this house was built by Albert Noe, the son of the man who built the hotel. And basically, this was designed by our own Lyndon Noe. And basically, you can see that it's very typical of Lyndon, typical of rustic contemporary. It's got shed roof angles. It has windows that look out into nature. It does not have your typical cut grass front lawn, front yard, but basically it's embedded in nature with things allowed to grow naturally. And so basically, another favorite one of mine, in fact, I think it's probably my favorite residential home in Jackson, and this was the home that Jimmy Wallace built out of on Plain. It's called Hartford Square. And basically, this was when Sally Wallace was going to Lambuth and was one of my interior design majors, and she became real interested in contemporary architecture. She got her builder's contractor's license, and then basically built this house. And it is a classic example of rustic contemporary, again, just embedded in nature with trees growing up all around the house and on a lake, and really, truly beautiful, one that you feel you could come. This is now the home of Bob Kilburn and the late Jane Kilburn. Another good example of rare contemporary alternative A-frame architecture, which was really in the 1980s and earlier. And basically, it's this is the Tinker Hill area out behind the mall. And then one of my favorites of kinky alternative architecture is the geodesic dome subdivision. I call this Munchkinville because they look like Munchkin houses. So these geodesic domes were inspired by Buckminster Fuller, and basically they are wonderful examples of this particular style that was so unusual and so rare for Jackson. Okay, quickly, industrial architecture, and this is the Martha Mills. Why, doesn't it look almost like a futuristic city that you might see built in the moon or something? And can you go back to that one? So basically, this is, again, industrial architecture, and basically this was built by the Cohen T. Williams, who basically built the Martha Mills plant here, and basically to this day the family no longer own it, but they sold it, and it's to Pillsbury and to I can't remember the name of the, but anyway, keep going.
Yeah.
And so then the most wonderful example of industrial architecture is the Bemis Village. And basically this is the Bemis Mill that sadly has been destroyed despite every effort to preserve it and to save it. And basically it was an ideal, Judson Bemis founded the Bemis Bag Company, and basically his nephew went to MIT and studied architecture and engineering, and the entire town was an industrial-based town, and it is well worth, if you've never been there, is to go, especially in the fall when it is so beautiful. All the trees have turned, and you can walk around, and it's like being in a time warp. It really is a special place. And all of the homes of the workers, it was built in different segments, and so you had segments for the upper management and for the middle management, and for homes there was even a Congo Avenue where the segregated blacks lived, etc. And lastly is vernacular architecture, which is something we often ignore, but to me is some of the most beautiful. It's so simple and elegant, and I'm showing you just two examples. But back to the house you see here is a cantilever house in Mercer, Tennessee, and it really is just a special barn. I'm trying to get Lonnie, who's on our State Historical Society, to help me get this. It's really something different and special, and I can't find any records telling who owned the land or who built it or whatever. And the last slide is this fabulous horse barn, thanks to Tammy, or not Tammy, Kim Blurton Johnson, who provided this slide. And wow, if this is not a marvelous example of vernacular architecture. Vernacular means every day. I could have had many, many buildings because all around us are barns and silos, etc. Well, I've taken you on this journey, and I suggest that we all meet back here in 100 years, and that we compare notes. So, thank you. I will be glad to stick around and answer questions for anybody that has them.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen a presentation that was put together with a lot of love and care and thought, and I don't know if we could have had a better speaker that could have taken us on this journey of architecture through Jackson-Madison County. Please let us thank Dr. Larry Ray again. Wonderful, wonderful job. So many memories he has in his mind. I'm so glad he is going to stay around for questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us again May 6th for small business for the next First Friday Forum. Make sure you check our website, Jackson-Madison 200. We have lots of events. And come back tomorrow and do the walking tour starting at 10, or come to the Poems East Main Street and hear these people tell more of the story of Jackson. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we're dismissed.